Hey, it's Dr. Lindsay Moreau with Ideal Human, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about something called adrenal fatigue, or more appropriately called HPA axis dysregulation would be the scientific way to say that. And so a lot of us have heard about adrenal fatigue and we wonder if we have it. So I want to give you some information about how I approach it and how I identify it, so that way hopefully you can take that away and understand your body a little bit better. So the most important thing to know about the adrenal glands is they are glands of stress. They help us make things like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, or epinephrine and norepinephrine, and help our body respond when we have moments of stress. I'm sure we've all been there where somebody tells you something and it just makes your heart jump and it starts beating really fast and your armpits start sweating, or maybe you get cold and then you're kind of shaky afterwards. Yeah, that's adrenaline. So those are our stress hormones. And so our adrenal glands work in concert with our thyroid and with our sex hormones as well to kind of give you your overall energy and mood for your day by day. Now, the adrenals can get out of balance if there are a lot of stresses on our body. And keep in mind, these are not just mental stresses. These can also be emotional stresses or physical stressors on our body as well. So most bodies respond to that stress initially by ramping up cortisol. And so that's why sometimes when you're studying really hard for a test and then you finish that test, you get sick immediately, or you're exhausted afterwards, but before you felt fine, or when you finally stop working, you go on that vacation, you get sick. Yeah, that's because that cortisol was high and then it drops when you finally relax and your body kind of catches up on things. So that's one thing that happens. Now, for many of us, when we're exposed to chronic stress, that cortisol actually starts going lower and lower because, much like insulin resistance, your brain is sick of hearing that high cortisol signal. So, it throws its hand there and says, you know what, I'm done listening, and it stops making the receptors that cortisol lands on. And so your cortisol eventually gets downregulated and your body kind of just stops making that normal cortisol rhythm. And so when that happens, you tend to have fatigue, you have a really hard time getting out of bed, you might have a really short tolerance to stress, and then often, ironically, you'll also sleep issues as well. So I want to take you guys through what a stress test looks like to look at those adrenals and kind of give you the different patient profiles I see with that. Okay, so this is an adrenal test that I do, and there's a couple of things I want you to know first and how we read these. So the first thing I want you to know is that this test is generated by taking 4 different samples, and that's what these blue dots represent. And then you'll see down here it has the time. That's the time that sample was taken. The second thing I want you to know is that this green area here, this is supposed to be the normal range. And so your cortisol should be decently high in the morning, and then it should curve down gradually throughout the day and be nice and low before you go to bed. And that's what your normal should look like. So now when we look at this patient, we can see right away that they're out of range twice, and that they have very high cortisol in the morning, and then again they've got this high cortisol in the evening. So this is a picture of somebody who might have some acute stressors, or somebody who has difficulties falling asleep. How do I know? Well, they must have a very stressful morning routine because that cortisol starts out very high. Maybe they have to deal with really bad traffic, or they've got to get their kids out the door. And then when we follow this is where they're going to feel the best, is right in that midday when they're right in the middle of the range. And so noon's their good time. And then as we go over here, you can see that cortisol starts rising again. And so they might be somebody who has a lot of afternoon stressors, but cortisol that's high at 10 p.m., this is something that's carrying over, and they're also going to be having a difficult time falling asleep, because if your cortisol is high, it promotes wakefulness. And so this is likely somebody who has a very difficult time falling asleep, and they may also have a difficult time staying asleep as well. So you can see again when you look down here that we've tallied up their cortisol and we get their total cortisol. And so overall, this is somebody who is making too much cortisol. And so they might feel, and what this presents like clinically often is somebody who I would describe as tired and wired. And so they don't deal with stress very well, and they're really kind of tense about it, and they tend to be a little bit more intense, what we would describe as high strung. So that's an instance of what you're looking at here, somebody who tends to be a little high strung. Now, most of us tend to be more on the bottom end. So your cortisol might be kind of like this, and it will tap through. That might be your curve. This would be more of a cortisol flat line. This is the opposite patient. This is somebody who is tired. And so when these patients come to me, they say, I cannot get out of bed in the morning. I could take a nap at any time of the day. Like, I never feel like doing anything. My energy is very low. But then again, paradoxically, they often can't sleep at night. And this is more the sleep where you can't stay asleep. And so you don't get very deep sleep, or you wake frequently, 2, 3, even 4, 5 times times a night. It's not to go to the bathroom or anything. It's not because your partner's waking you or the dog's waking you up. It's because you just can't stay asleep. And what we're seeing and what I think is going on there is that because you're missing that cortisol spike and your cortisol just stays the same instead of curving every day, that your body loses track of where it's at in their circadian rhythm, because this is a huge part of your circadian rhythm. And so it's not sure if it should be awake or asleep. And so it kind of is just always exhausted but never really sleeping well. And so that's kind of the other thing you'll see on these profiles. And their total cortisol when we test it would be low. The other things on this particular test is we get DHEA, which is another one of our stress hormones. This can often will kind of mimic whatever that cortisol is doing. And so if somebody has very low DHEA and then they also have low cortisol, well, we're gonna have to make sure that we're boosting that DHEA as well, because that's a hormone precursor and it's really important for all of our hormone creation. The other marker is this SIGA, which stands for secretory IgA. And the reason this is included on this panel is because oftentimes when the adrenal glands are low or they're not functioning correctly, it's because there's an issue with the digestive tract. That is where most of our immune system lives. And so if there's something going on in the digestive tract, that will often be the biggest stressor on the body, which will manifest in any sort of symptoms, diarrhea, constipation, IBS, anything. You could, like, even just bloating might be a sign that your immune system is overactive in your gut or dealing with something that's going to create that SIJ, which could either be really high or in a chronic issue will be really low. This person's on the low end of normal, so that would definitely be on my radar, and I would be asking them questions about their digestive tract to try to understand if that's what's ramping their cortisol up. Okay, so now you should understand how the adrenal glands impact stress and what those cortisol levels look like, whether they're high or low, and how that impacts the person and kind of some of the things they should be feeling. The way we address this is pretty much always the same, as we identify what's stressing the body. If it's mental, emotional, or physical stressors, we have to discuss how are we going to deal with this, how are we going to decrease the impact that stress has on the body. And then I have a whole tool chest of different herbs I use. I use some, they're all called adaptogens. Some of them boost you up, some of them bring that cortisol down. They all really help level, and a lot of them actually improve athletic performance as well, and brain function. So that can be a really great side effect of supporting your adrenal glands, as usually brain function improves, energy improves, sleep improves, your immune system gets better as well.